and he's going to talk about, what was it, sacred geometry?
Geometry and human circuitry.
Geometry and human circuitry.
Wow.
Hand over to Nick.
I'm a bit overwhelmed, I must admit. It's been a fantastic weekend, beginning of the week. And what I'd really like to do is, I want to talk a little bit about geometry because it is one of my great loves. I just suddenly got switched onto it one afternoon in Glastonbury. Before that I didn't care at all. So this is actually the practical result of the kind of stuff that I hope to demonstrate to you today. So I want to talk just a bit about the platonic solids, because we haven't unfortunately got time to go through the whole growth sequence. I want to talk a little bit about order and balance and reflection probably on the way through, because all of that's really important to the geometry. It's also a very good kind of extended metaphor for dealing with complicated ideas, and it will get us all just tuned to these shapes, most of which will be familiar to everybody in this room, I'm sure, although they're by far from familiar to most people. Then what I'd like to do is have a willing volunteer up here so that I can endeavour to demonstrate, gotcha, thank you sir, that there is actually a physical connection between these geometries and certain circuitries in the human body. As far as we can work out, the circuits are all related to the meridians that are used by Chinese medicine, but they're kind of in quite big bundles. They're ever so easy to test, these ones. And these circuits connect us to earth, air, fire, water and ether, lying to the elemental nature of our world. And they have become disconnected. So I'll look for a volunteer and we'll endeavour to show you how these circuits work. And finally, if we've got a bit of time, I'd like to show you some of the more complex geometries, because this thing was 4 hours easy work on a Friday afternoon, and it was just one of the most great afternoons of my life. And then it just kind of straggled into 20 years of work. It started in 1999 and we basically put a cap on it this year. So let's see how it all pans out. This is the first time I've done the geometry since I did the last of the work. So we're going to start off just with a little bit of memory. We kick off with the dot, which in the case of sort of classical geometry or whatever is nothing, it's naught if you like, no dimensions at all. One of the important things to remember about the classical geometers though is that they didn't necessarily distinguish between the dot, the circle and the straight line. As far as they were concerned, they were pretty much the same thing, on the basis that you can expand a dot infinitely until it becomes an infinitely big circle, and then effectively you've got a straight line. They're very, very interesting thinkers. The other thing is, of course, that infinitesimal, which is what the point is, if we look at the roots of the word, even that means infinitely dividable, which the physicists, some of them, are beginning to think everything is. So we've got something that's sitting there, it's oneness, it's been there forever, it's homogeneous, it's isomorphic, it's just sort of not been doing anything. We could call it spirit or consciousness or God if we wanted to. A friend of mine calls it Jimmy the One. I like Jimmy the One. So Jimmy the One decides that he's had enough of sitting infinity with absolutely nothing happening, and he's going to try moving. He's going to try making a bit of difference in this homogeneous everything that he's in. So the first thing he does is draws a circle around himself and then moves to the border of the circle. So straight away we've got the first dimension. It's totally imaginary, we can't actually see it. You can call it length, but obviously it's got a bit of thickness, it's got all sorts, so it's totally theoretical, this one is, not actually there at all. But what's happened is Jimmy the One has gone over here, he's decided this one thing is still one thing, it's still one thing even now, but he's decided to become two things and take himself seriously. That's the point. So he's actually got to believe this operation, and maybe in order to do that properly, Jimmy's had to forget that he's one with everything. So we get the first dimension, length. The thing is that as soon as we've now got an I and a U and a here and a there, and we're suddenly in the dualistic world that we find ourselves in now. Automatically, that gives us, say, an I and a U, and we get the necessary balance to that is the third, is the grouping, we. So now we're into the actual second dimension, which is the creation of our first plane, which is the triangle. And you can see I've shown that it can be created within this simple two-circle shape. It's called the bladder of the fish, the vesica piscis. I have no idea why they did that, but basically all geometry can be generated out of this pattern. We'll see that the other shapes we're going to be interested in today are the square and the pentagon, which can also be generated in the vesica. Now those three planes, the triangle and the square and the pentagon, between them form all the what are called the platonic solids. The interesting thing is that we get kind of 1 in the form of the straight line, and then we get 2 in the form of the plane, 3 in the form of the triangle. And the triangle, when stuck together in an ingenious way, bursts us into the third dimension, and suddenly we've gone real. We're no longer in theoretical flat geometry. Even these planes are like a photon thick, aren't they? They've got more dimension to them, but here we are in the real first dimension. 4 sides, we've gone 1, 2, 3 and 4 into the third dimension. So we say that nothing begat 1 because 1 was always there, 1 begat 2, 2 begat 3, and 3 begat the 10,000 things, all the solid material things we see around us. Plato associated this, the tetrahedron, the simplest of his forms, with fire. That's going to be important later. 2 more of the Platonic forms are also made out of triangles. We have the octahedron, which has got basically 6 points and 8 faces, 8 triangular faces. And Plato associated this with the element of air, and nowadays it's associated with prana and with all sorts of other microscopic energetic processes. The taking on of life energy is what this one's associated with, called an octahedron. And the third one that's made out of triangles is one that you've all seen before this weekend in the structured atom model. This is your icosahedron, which has got 12 points and 20 triangular faces, and was connected by Plato with the element of water. We're most familiar with the Platonic form that's made out of squares. This one's got 8 vertexions, or corners, and 6 faces. It's called a cube. Plato associated it with the Earth, though there's a little bit of discussion about what's exactly associated with the Earth, which hopefully I'll get onto in a minute. And the last shape is ether. This is the one that's got 12 faces, each have got 5 sides to them, and there's 20 vertexions, 20 points on it. Plato associated that with ether. Now here's where we start getting really interesting, because we know, don't we, as above so below, we know that there should be enough information in the tiniest thing to rebuild the whole thing. And one of the ways this is done is through reflection, and geometry can show us really well how this works. It's a simple little mental exercise which won't be a problem, but I'll show you a picture in a minute anyway. What I want you to do is imagine that this is a dice covered in wands. So it's got 1 on the top, 1 on the bottom, and 1 on each of the faces. Then I want you to imagine that the dot on the top is connected with the dots in the centres of these faces by like beams of light inside. And then I want you to imagine that the dot on the bottom is also connected to each of the dots that it's adjacent to. And what you should be seeing in your mind, oh, hang on a moment, that's a slide that just shows that the Platonic solids were actually thought about a long time before Plato. These things were found in the Scarra Grey, and they clearly are the same form as the Platonic form. Some of them, there weren't very many of them there. For some reason there were many hundreds of these. Nobody really knows what they are, so they're guessing at projectile weapons, I think was the last time I saw it. So there we go. Inside a cube is an etheric octahedron, because the cube's got 6 faces and 8 vertexions, and this has got 6 vertexions and 8 faces. So basically you can quite see how one of these would sit nicely inside one of those. Now what we need to do is imagine that the octahedron in the middle kind of grows until it pierces the centres of the faces of its container, and we wait until it grows to the point where its vertices bisect exactly the vertices of the cube. Obviously the edges aren't the same length because a lot of them are sloped, but what we get then is a wholly new form. That's the cube inside the octahedron, because it must work the other way around. And if we imagine the growth system, we end up with the marriage of earth and air. It's called Adam's Earth by some people, and at the heart of that particular shape, if you knock all the points off, you get the first of the Archimedean shapes, which is made of 6 squares, 8 triangles, so it contains all of the elements of its parents, which I really like. It's a kind of melding and reflection and growing, and a sort of, if you like, an etheric cube can be imagined inside the octahedron and the other way round. It will come as no surprise to you, because you heard that dodecahedrons wrap themselves around icosahedra the other day. This is absolutely the case. If we do the same thing with the dots on this, and imagine that each dot is connected inside to the centres of the faces to which it's adjacent, you will see that inside your dodecahedron is an octahedron. Okay, once again, thank you very much. I thought that'd be popular. So obviously 12 vertexions, 12 faces, 20 vertoxions, 20 faces, so they just meld really nicely together. If you can see an icosahedron in a dodecahedron, you can see it the other way around by definition. And if we do the same thing where we imagine that shape in there growing until its vertices bisect each other, we come up with another very exotic shape. This one's the marriage. I love these. These grow really amazingly into beautiful forms, and it is actually the marriage of water and ether, the two kind of universal growth media, if you like. Surely these things can't be accidents. And if we take all the points off of that one, we end up with a second of the Archimedean shapes. This one, which is a icosahedron, and it contains within it 12 pentagons and 20 triangles, exactly the forms of its parents. So this growth thing is really lovely, and I think one of the reasons people find all the geometry so attractive is because it's exhibiting balance all the time. You're seeing this beautiful kind of, not similarity, I've lost the word for that, but you know what I mean. Absolutely exactly reflected all the way around. It's very pleasing.
Symmetry.
Symmetry, that's the word, thank you very much. Sometimes they just go, you know. So the Platonic forms are all made up of single shapes, either triangles, squares, or pentagons. Once you get into the Archimedeans, which are treated classically as feminine shapes, you get cooperation between squares and triangles, and between pentagons and triangles. And if you look through the whole set of shapes, it pretty much mixes all of them up together to be able to grow. So, this one, which is the only one we haven't looked at, if we imagine the 3 dots in the centres of the faces and 1 in the bottom and we join them all up together, what we actually get is a mini tetrahedron upside down in the original tetrahedron. And if we allow that to grow until the vertices bisect each other, we get the star tetrahedron, which really is a star piece of geometry. It does amazing stuff, and it could actually be the subject of a talk all on its own. So we've now found that the Platonic solids are not only themselves, they're kind of in some way reflections of each other. There is actually a set of shapes called Archimedean duals, which use all of the Archimedean shapes, put dots in the middle and join them all together in the middle and create a whole new shape. And they're pretty fascinating things as well, but we don't kind of have time to go into those. So we've got earth, air, fire, water and ether in the form of the Platonic solids. We can grow this further. You can see that it's actually growth in size as well as complexity here, because we start off with the triangle. The square, the pentagon, the hexagon and the octagon have all got the same length edge as the original shape. So you can actually see that the forms are growing as well as becoming more complex. So it's kind of like 2 forms are growing in one go. And what they look like if you stick them all together is that. So that's the full set of the 5 Platonics and 13 Archimedeans. It's made out of a fabulous toy called magnetics that allow you to go. And these have all got the same length edges, look. So that tetrahedron over there is in scale with this great rhombi icosahedron here. And I haven't got enough of this stuff to build them all at once, so this is somebody else's photo, but building one of these really does take me a bit of time. That's barely this big, and that's almost as big as my head.
Is that one not convex?
It is, because, and that's structural. Really, the shape of this one is the hexagons, the squares, and the decagons. So it's got 10-sided, 4-sided, and 6-sided shapes. All of the other stuff that's in there is made there to give it the structure to stand up.
I mean, does it dimple in, or?
Yeah.
It dimples
concave.
But sorry.
Concave.
Concave. It goes.
It is concave, yeah. Okay. But that's a convenient. The shape itself is outlined in silver, and although you can't see it on this photograph, it looks like they've used white in there to show the silver is the key of the shape. The white is there because this is the kind of structure you have to put in to get a magnetic stick and ball system like that, not just to collapse in on itself. You see what I mean? So it's a fun game, because actually there's secrets in that. If you just try to build it as it looks, I guarantee you'll get up to about here, and something down there will just go snick, and you can't put it right. You've got to take it all apart and start all over again. Lots of fun. So that's the basic intro to geometry. In my full talk, I actually go through all of the Archimedeans and show how the shapes you've just seen, through reflection and doubling, actually turn into all of these others. It really is a fantastic journey. And then we've got another load of more complex geometry that is actually built on all of that. But I think what I'd really like to do now is grab the bull by the horns and see if we can't actually do some of this muscle testing. Anybody here experience muscle testing, also known as kinesiology? 1 or 2 people? 3 people? 4, 5, 6, that's good. There's, excellent, quite a few then. It's a pretty amazing healing modality which relies on asking the body a closed question, a question that requires a yes or no answer. It's used a lot for determining and detecting food intolerances and allergies, and whether you're dealing with an allergy or an intolerance, what it's to and what you can do about it. That's how I first discovered kinesiology. It's amazing. And what we do is you use a muscle testing technique to try and find out whether the body's saying yes or no. And what we used to do is we used to use an outstretched arm, and we just say hold and put a little bit of pressure on the end of the arm. But when we're testing a lot of circuits, and these connect 12 circuits between them, a lot of people have got back and shoulder trouble and find it tiring, and that can interfere with this sort of test, and I didn't really like it very much. So I got trained over a couple of days using Touch for Health kinesiology, which uses this as the test muscle instead. So the testee, my lovely volunteer, when we ask you up, will be asked to hold his hand like that. I'll support his elbow with one of my hands, and I'm just going to test him by putting gentle pressure on the arm. And those of you who've done martial arts will know that this is the unbreakable arm. You get thrown, this is what you roll over, because it can be really stiff. You can actually get a really strong man up here to try and get me to move this, and it wouldn't work. Which is why it's particularly good for this sort of test, because basically if there's any movement in it at all, that is a negative answer, and if there's no movement at all, it's positive, it's a yes. So that's the basic long and short of it. Let's see if it's going to work. If you'd like to come up and join me, that would be really marvellous. Is it Phil?
Rob.
Phil?
Rob.
I've still not got them all, have I?
Yeah, I'm coming around here.
If you can avoid all the trip hazards, you'll be doing really well. I've got plenty of spare volunteers, so don't worry too much.
Thank you.
So if you can come over here where we're under the light and Mr. Camera can see us. Okay. I tend to keep contact with my testee once I've got him, because we kind of build a bit of an attunement and all of this. What I want you to do first of all is just hold your arm at that kind of angle.
Yeah.
I'm really not going to use a lot of pressure, it'll just be that.
Okay.
And as I do it, I'm going to ask you to hold, which is, it's not a wrestling match, it's simply a matter of just trying to match the pressure I'm putting on it. Okay. And if you put your right hand over your belly button, because that's where all of your meridians meet, in and around the belly button, and because we're using your whole hand, it joins them all together. So if I ask you just to look over there and hold, and just anywhere you look, and then just hold, nice and strong. Okay, so now let go of that. And now I'm going to ask you, I don't want you to go overboard, but can you remember a time when you thought people were really not appreciating you? When it really wasn't working out well?
Yeah.
Yeah, do you want to hold that? And
Okay.
hold? Okay. Now can you remember a time when you were absolutely on top of things and you'd actually won?
Yeah.
Got that in your head?
Yeah.
And hold. Okay? So you saw the difference there. And you didn't put that on, did you?
No.
No. It's really, really peculiar. The test I did that really blew me away was I was doing a health show in Brecon, and a Gurkha came up, and he was like built like a tractor. And I said, do you mind having your he asked, I said, no. Mind having your fire circuit tested in public? No. Put his arm out and just went down like a kitten. It's a very strange thing, and this is one of the great things about this, is the actual kinesiology itself. What is it inside this man that's answering the questions? You know, I've done lots of it now. My kinesiologist lives 200 miles away from me, and she's doing an amazing job. So there you go. You can know what a positive feels like and what a negative.
Yeah.
Okay, so do you mind having your fire circuit tested in public?
Okay.
That's all right.
Yeah.
We have to ask, because it's really polite, because
Yeah.
the test point is between your bum and your balls, basically. 3 fingers.
I need to.
Yes, you
That's
do.
okay.
That's all right.
Both shut.
Sometimes I get paid for this, you know. Okay.
Yeah.
3 fingers under there. This is why we always do the fire circuit.
Yeah, this is why you
first.
didn't tell me.
I'm just distracting him really. It's all about around it. So if you look over that way, I'm doing.
Yeah.
Okay, and hold. Okay. Can I have a holder upper of geometry for me so that he's not looking at all of it? Okay.
This is great, this is on.
Okay, so you're right. You'll be able to look at can you now look at that tetrahedron?
Yeah,
The atomic symbol
yeah.
and hold. Okay, and look at the roof again. And hold. Back at the text. And hold. There we go. So that's your fire circuit.
Right,
Okay,
yeah, thank you.
okay. Thank you very much. There will be more. Just hold on a moment. If you could, that'd be great. So that is your fire circuit. Somehow the geometry is giving him a strengthened circuit in there. Quite amazing. And if we had a candle, he could look at the candle and that would have
Oh,
the
so
same
I've got the
effect.
candle. Do you want me to
Yeah.
go get it?
Might as well. We can do the candle.
If I get to
test.
touch myself, I'm.
Yeah, we're not going to go back. Yeah, we will do that. We'll do that again just before we finish.
That'd be great, yeah.
Right. Okay. What was the point? So,
I don't know what was going to happen.
Because that's the font where it comes to.
yes, it's
Oh, no,
the actual place where you put your fingers is a test point. It's simply for some reason where we have to put our fingers to test this particular piece of information.
Okay.
So if I showed him, do you want to put your fingers there again for a moment? Okay. Well done, thank you. You'd like to show that. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, and hold. See, the cube doesn't work.
Oh,
Well,
And hold. Tetrahedron does. That's the point. Now the thing is, the circuits themselves we reckon are either circular or egg-shaped. We're not quite sure,
Okay.
but they all kind of interpenetrate and support each other. So you let
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. The Earth circuit is in the middle of the head, just above the medulla oblongata, which is about here.
Yeah.
I've got one. Basically, so
Okay.
3 fingers on the back of that.
oh yeah.
And look away into the distance. Hold. Thank you very much. Got a cube. And hold the cube. You got
Yeah,
You got it.
look at
Okay.
the cube.
And hold. Right. And look away. And hold. So there's your Earth circuit. We can also use a crystal to reconnect that circuit. If you look at an Earth crystal or at a cube, that reconnects that circuit. We'll now do one of the water circuits. There are 3 of them. They're all safe. It's okay, you're safe now.
Okay.
Yeah, well, pretty much anyway. There's the thymus, the xiphoid, which is the little dent in the middle of your chest, and the creative process, as we call it, which is where the 2 sets of ribs meet. For the sake of this, we'll do the thymus, which as far as we can tell is actually a hologram of the whole system. It's got loads of little circuits in it, and it reconnects itself as a result of reconnecting the other 2. But we can just look away in the corner of the room. Okay, and now look at the icosahedron and hold. Okay.
Yes.
This is what, quite often the person that volunteers for this role is the most cynical person in the room, and they're the best people to test for some reason. So that's, the same thing applies to the other 2 water circuits.
I haven't got a match, so you got that.
Yeah,
Where's the
we'll save it for our grand finale,
Yeah.
shall we?
What's up, places?
Okay, so let's go again. Right, so there were 3 water circuits, they're here, here and here, but the same thing applies as to the thymus. When we started doing this work, we were finding young people with the water circuit still intact. Now we don't find anybody, and I don't know why that is either. So that leaves us with the air circuits. There's 4 air circuits, and they're in the throat, the 3rd eye, the crown, and the auric, which is about a hand's width above our head. And the organ that's affected by the connection of these is our pineal gland. Okay, so what I'd like you to do is look into the distance and hold.
Where am I put my hand?
Oh, good point. No wonder. You're putting your hand on either your throat or your 3rd eye, I'd go. Well, go for the throat, because then you can see through your 3rd eye. Yeah. Okay, and into the distance. Thanks for reminding me. And hold. Okay. And that's an octahedron. Okay, and hold. That's it. And hold. Yep, that was odd. There you go.
I don't know if I'm.
That's, and hold. Yep. And hold. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a suggestion.
You reckon?
Well, I don't know.
No, it's
I'm trying to work
the
it
thing
out.
is that people are working out what food intolerances and allergies are, and in 60 or 70% of cases they're sorting them out.
Right.
This whole internal navigator thing is extremely strange.
I don't know if I'm just cooperating with you. Do you know what I mean?
Well, no, I know what you mean. Well, that might be the way it works. Who
Yeah.
knows? I mean, it's just that this is kind of like they're fairly major circuits. I can actually do the food intolerance thing as well if I've got all the kit. Because what the kinesiologists have is boxes and boxes and boxes of samples of everything, food and elements and chemicals. And they basically try to find the one they're after. They'll put it in your hand, and you will test weak if you're allergic or intolerant to it. So you might well be cooperating with me, and I thank you for it.
Okay.
And the other thing is that if you are, then for the last 19 years or so, you're one of several hundred people who successfully cooperated. And so far, nobody's walked out of this process in disgust either. And honestly, this weirds me out even after 20 years. I think, are you cooperating? It's very odd. It is. I'm not really. But for me, it's made such a huge difference having all these things reconnected and dealing with the people who are doing the work with me like this. You know, you always get an amazing crowd of people when you choose to do this sort of thing. So, would you like to cooperate with me one more time?
I better say yes.
Yes, we've got the solar set now, which is the heart, the tip of the pubic bone, and the solar plexus. It's actually 2 finger widths above the belly button, this one. And that's to do with the collection of power and its distribution. Yeah, that'll do nicely. And look into the distance and hold. Okay, and this time we want hold and look away. Hold. Okay, now would you like to close your eyes and imagine your own internal sun?
Okay.
Okay, and hold. Excellent. See, it works just as well if you imagine it. So, thank you very much. Oh, shall we do the candle? Anyone got a...
I've got a light.
Let's give him one more cheap throw before we let him go, shall we? Okay. So, let's have the 3 fingers back in the perineum then.
Excuse me.
Yeah. It's great. They sometimes wish you had longer arms. Okay, I'm looking to the distance.
It's been a while since I've done
You
this.
just turn around with the candle so you can't see it for a moment. Just turn around so you can't see out the corner of his eye. Thank you very much. Very good, okay. And hold. Okay, and now at the candle. And hold. Okay. I actually put quite a lot of pressure on you that time. So there you go. We always like to leave people testing strong rather than weak as well, so that'll do for the moment. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Hey, thank you.
Honestly, even after 20 years, it's still a total relief when that works. Don't normally do this sort of stuff. It's just that this particular setup really attracts you. The lady who did it did a 1-hour introduction, which just totally blew me away. And since then, I've been absolutely hooked. So, here's the trick. You've just seen 12 circuits that can be reconnected to earth, air, fire, water and ether. What we do normally now is we'd actually have a lunch break, we'd test everybody's 12 circuits, and then after lunch we'd do a 20-minute ceremony that is nearly all to do with forgiveness that would reconnect those circuits permanently. So you look at the geometry, you say the words, you come out of the ceremony and you are reconnected. And that works to the point where I meet people out at festivals and stuff who say, oh yeah, I've done some of that, but I don't know how much. So I just work through their circuits in turn until I find out how many ceremonies they've done. Because when this turned into 20 years work, what happened was the year after we did this one, and I was just so happy. But they came up with another ceremony which reconnects a circuit that basically runs from the temples to the sacrum, and it used all the Platonic and all the Archimedean geometry to reconnect that one circuit. And then it went on. And by the time we got to ceremony 7, we thought, you know what, we just want to give this a break. We never paid anything for any of this because the people, Juliet and Jeeva Carter, who do it all, had us down right from the word go as people who were going to love it. So, but come ceremony 7, we were really tired, and we took 4 years out, and eventually went back to do ceremonies 7, 8 and 9 all together. And it turned out that doing ceremony 7 was a bit unsettling for people without 8 and 9, and so was ceremony 8. It was leading to people having difficulty administering things, managing relationships. But once ceremony 10 was done, it all came together again. So it's been a really, really massive journey for us. It has totally changed my life. The geometry has become not quite an obsession, but almost. And we really like doing the ceremony work with people because it always leads to really beautiful days. So that's basically the thrust of this talk. I really wanted to keep it tighter within the time because I thought we'd be running late. What I want to do is just let you feast your eyes on some of just a tiny selection of the other geometries we've been using in the later ceremonies. They all kind of build on the sort of knowledge we've developed from these and the energetic interplay. Noel has seen, what was the man's name with the camera?
Oh, Harry Oldfield.
Harry Oldfield's got a camera that takes photographs of energy patterns, and when we showed him some of the geometry you could see the energy. It was sort of running around inside the shape until you span it, and then you could see it just flowing off the geometry. I also once went to a healing fair where they were doing aura photographs, so I said I want to hold this. What we had was the Great Rhombi Icosy dodecahedron, but we had it with stars on it, so it's a star. We call it the immortality star. And I said, I'd like you to take a photo of my aura, then I'll go in the garden with this shape for an hour, I'll come back and you can photograph my aura again. And he said, well, there's no point because this is like 3-month aura photograph, it'll take that long for whatever I do today to process into the next photo. So I said, well, humour me, let me do it anyway. Give me a discount on the photos because they're 25 quid each or something. And you could see my normal orange and red aura, it's just this huge glowing lump with a beard in the middle of it. But on the top of it was this bright green stripe. It was like a piece of smoke and it was really bright in the middle and sort of fadey around the edges. And he said, well, that's what I mean. He said that over the next 3 months, he said that will go down the right hand side of your face and in through your throat. So, a bit like Alien or something. So I said, well, okay, let's give it a go. Went and sat in the garden for an hour with this star, went back in again, had the photograph taken, and lo and behold, there was just a wisp of green disappearing in through my throat in the second picture. He'd never been so surprised, I don't think. So, and we've had a lot of that. We've had a lot of sort of backup, synchronistic, weird stuff happening all the way through, just going, yes, this is an interesting path to be on. So there's something that was developed for one of the later ceremonies. Just the quality of engineering in these things is pretty amazing. What that is, you know, we identified that in the marriage of earth and air, when we married them together and chopped the bits off the end, we ended up with a cube octahedron. Vector equilibrium. It's not the only way of getting your cube octahedron. Here is a star tetrahedron, which is an upward pointing tet and a downward pointing tet, and in the middle there's an octahedron. So fire reflects on fire and in the middle is air. I really like that, that's really cunning. Now, the thing is that if you get 2 of those, they look like this. You can see that what I got is 2 star tetrahedrons put together there. And if I put this on the end of it, you can see that then I've got 3. Okay? Now, the point is that at the joining points where the 2 star tets meet, just here, is one of these. And I'm going to hand this round because this shows you why vector equilibrium is called vector equilibrium. It's cube octahedron, but the edges, the vertices, are the same length as the radials that come from the middle. There we go. And what this is a giant star tetrahedron version of this. It's, I think, looks like the 128 cell. We've got a 64 cell, 128 cell and 256 cell, one of those massive gold plated star tet complex made up entirely of those. So I just love the complexity and balance coming out of one simple component that is just getting used again and again and again, that one over there. So that's one of them. That's a different view of the same thing, and you can actually just about make out the star tets in that. So it's totally loaded with octahedra and is a fantastic piece just to see spinning leisurely in a large hall. That's another one. That one's based on the pentagon and the dodecahedron, but again, it's what they were trying to work with the geometry was these kind of vortex things that we see. We're trying to get beyond just the static geometry.
What is that right there?
Well, we don't have a name for that one, I don't think. I think that one might have been called the Soul's Star or something. There have been so many of them that I forget what they're called. That isn't one that I've seen before. Every now and then they come up with this massive piece of geometry. We'll see one at the end. In fact, I'll wait till the end for that. That, in the middle of this, is that. You can only just make it out, but in the middle of that is a flower of life, a three-dimensional flower of life. So the vesica piscis, but kind of repeated in the hexagonal form. So right in the middle of it is this amazing geometric form, which in itself contains all of the Archimedean and Platonic shapes. So sitting at the heart of that one are all the other shapes. There's a star-based one. They are fantastic. Look how they've done that. And they are brilliant when you've got them up. They actually, this is like these stills don't really do them justice. They really come to life when they're spinning, because then with light on them you get loads of moire patterns in them as well. You know, little black lines and bronzy and goldy kind of sails between the black lines and the edge. And they end up looking really surreal. And they cost an awful lot of money to import. And every now and then the bloody customs break them and we've got to glue them back together before we can use them. That's got a 64 cell in the middle of it, and is basically a map of, you know, the little wooden book about the Earth energies, and the complex grid that fits over the sort of composite grid that fits around the whole thing. Well, that's basically a model of that, and in the middle of it there's one of those big star heads. Sometimes these things are easier to photograph using their shadows. And with this one, the inner bit spins in a different direction from the outer bit as well. There's another one that's got a stained glass device in the middle of it. That's another flower of life. That's a bit of a close-up of it. Again, those two spin in different directions as well. And you can see this one is surrounded in a three-dimensional flower of life. There's the 6 petals. In the full talk, you'd actually see a big stained glass three-dimensional flower of life. 3 flowers of life interleafed to make a cube octahedron that's actually round, and it goes egg-shaped round as you spin it as well. Very lively piece of geometry. There's another one. That one's got pieces in it. That's actually got one of these in the middle of it. Oh, I should tell you about that. We pointed out earlier on that these two are married together and they make a shape called an icosydodecahedron. And we pointed out also earlier that Plato connected this with Earth. Strangely, John Dee connected the dodecahedron with Earth, and we wanted to find out why that might have been. So we had one of these made, and what it is a dodecahedron, but it's got pentagrams in each of the faces. This might be difficult to see, so I'll hand it round so you can all have a go. But if you put index fingers on either side of one straight line on the pentagram, and your thumbs on the other, you can see I've got a square. Everybody see that I've got a square there? And I can then put these fingers, my middle fingers, are they? Or are they my ring fingers? Don't know, those fingers there on another square. And my little fingers can go on the back. And what I've found in there is a cube. So inside the marriage of ether and, or inside ether, or the icosahedron for that matter, is a cube. And we know that inside a cube is an octahedron. So actually they're all nested together really well. And although Kepler tried to do a really good job of explaining that to us, people find it very difficult to imagine. But here they can see it. You can see how a cube nests inside a dodecahedron for your very self.
What is that one again?
That one's it's simply a dodecahedron with the opposite corners joined. So it's got a 5-pointed star in it.
This is the John Dee one?
Yes, that's the one John Dee connected with Earth. And I did try with that. I did try with cotton and thread and stuff to actually pick out one face of each of the 5 cubes, but I gave up in the end. Really, I got more important things to do in my time. And that's the one I wanted to finish with. That is a really seriously hyperdodecahedron. It's about this big, and you're looking straight down the middle of it there. And that one, I remember, just blew me away when I saw it. But just the next week, somebody lent me a Vedic maths book, and the picture in the middle of the Vedic maths book was one of those. So I showed it to the guy who built it, and he was really surprised that somebody else had done it before. But so that's basically a little bit of an introduction to my introduction to sacred geometry. I'm happy to answer questions on how it all came about and what we're doing with it or whatever, but yes.
Maybe I missed it, but I can see how it connects to the body circuit. Could you explain what the connection is between the geometry that you're showing us and the geometry of our physical body, the circuit of the body?
Yes, our theory is that basically everything is geometric, and just like when I do a lot of geometric artwork, and as I'm doing it, it's stuff that's manifesting outside myself, and I find it absolutely fascinating. The same thing as posters I do. I just can't take my eyes off them when I've done them. And we think that the geometry is the same thing. We think that inside us are resonant counterpart structures that are looking out for things to sing with and resonate with, and that somehow these inner energetic systems lock onto these. I've heard them described as the keys to our genetic library. And we call them electromagnetic circuits because we've also discovered, and we won't bother, we could do this, but we don't really need to because it would work the same way. If I'd put a mobile phone switched on next to Rob's head, he would have tested weak. And that's magnetic interference, and if you show him any of the Platonic geometry, it will strengthen his response to the mobile phone. If you get him to pick up a plug board with electricity running through it, again he will test weak. But that's electrical interference, and it's the magnetic forms that actually balance it. So there's a whole lot of places we can go to with it. It does seem on that basis, and on some other tests we've done, they seem to be electromagnetic circuits. And who can guess how it is that we are actually linked that way? But in the later ceremonies we actually connect circuits that go into the planetary geometries. So we've got 7 planetary geometries for the inner planets, plus 1 for the one that got blown up. So you get connected to the planets and the sun, and as we go on further to the mind of light beyond the sun, which is interpreted as whatever is pulsing data at the sun, because the basic theory there, I am going to stop in a minute, basic theory there is that we have a pineal gland and a third eye, pineal specifically, that is designed to absorb light. It's made of retinal cells partly. In fact, there are still some old reptiles on the planet, crocodilian type creatures, that have got like a thin skin here where light actually travels into the top of their head. So we have a light sensitive organ right in the middle, in the darkest bit of our brain, and it's got light sensitive cells in it, so we're saying it's designed to receive light. And the idea is that the sun is the solar system's pineal gland, and that it is stepping down data that arrives at our pineal, and that the sun itself is stepping down data that is arriving at us from the galactic centre. This is the kind of thing the Maya were talking about and doing their calendars for. Yes, sir. Behind you first.
Yeah, 'cause I've seen something about how sacred geometry is used to show certain points within not only the Earth but also on other planets, where you have meridians and like the equator and.
Oh, yeah. The most well-known and commonly observed fact like that is one of these. It's actually called the tetrahedral constant, because if you imagine there's a planet round that, then what you've got is a tetrahedron at 19.5 degrees above the equator and another tetrahedral edge at 19.5 degrees below the equator. And it was thought that things like Jupiter's red spot and 1 or 2 other features are quite commonly found on the points of the tetrahedron.
Oh, yeah.
And I think there's a lot of other geometries. There's hexagons visible. Is it hexagons visible on the poles of Saturn?
Yeah.
That big storm they've got, but you do find other geometries out there as well. Like some of those cheeky photos that the man from the Mars mission put up, where he's got some photos from Pioneer and Voyager of all the various moons, and 1 or 2 of them you can actually see the planet rise behind the moon that they're photographing, and it doesn't look round. It looks icosahedral. I swear, if you go looking at them, some of those moon-like bodies look like they're that shape rather than actual spheroids. Whether that's, and some of them have got really deep runnels in them as well. One of the things that really engaged me about the Thunderbolts project, by the way, is that the whole disconnection of these circuits we were told it came about as a result of all of this trouble we had with the planets, all the electrical discharges and the disturbance of the solar system and all of that, and that one of the things we're trying to do is correct our sublimated selves that are in shock and behaving badly because we didn't realise this happened. But 20 years ago when we started, the only source we had for this, I was just like, was Zachariah Sitchin. And I was just never happy with that. I totally accepted the battle, the cosmic battle and all that. But Sitchin is just fundamentally unreliable. And to have all this great stuff and be having to refer to him because we didn't have any other sources was just frankly excruciatingly embarrassing. And I am much, much happier to send people looking at symbols of an alien sky, for example, or discovery of the electric comet. The Thunderbolts info fed directly into this work for me. It did, in that it like so many other things over the 20 years, it gave it a validation that it was sadly lacking before. In fact, what we had was an obvious lack of validation at that point with Mr. Sitchin, but there you go. We don't have to talk about him anymore.
So,
Yes, sir.
yeah, Nick, the star tetrahedron is a very powerful shape, and yet for some reason the pyramids and the Merkaba, which is the most powerful meditation I've discovered to date, seem to have that additional side. Can you kind of shed some light on how that
The
evolved?
additional side.
Well, is it not the pyramid that's kind of like...
Well, these aren't quite like the pyramid, are they? The Great Pyramid is different because hasn't it got an angle of 51 degrees or something? So it's actually got a height which is equal to the radius of a circle that is of the same area of the square base that it's got. So the Merkaba and the Star Tet, therefore, being geometric and identical shapes, are not, kind of strictly speaking, related to the Great Pyramid, which is a thing of itself. The Merkaba is obviously geometrically uniform because it's a star tet pointing upwards. We've apparently got this energy field around us, and the top of the upward pointing star tet is about here, and the bottom of the downward pointing star tet is about 18 inches into the ground. And the idea is that you imagine this as a kind of light entity around yourself. One of them spins one way, one of them spins the other way, and apparently I'm told by people who can dowse, which I can't, that you get a detectable energy field coming from the human being when you do that. Like a little motor, really. And I agree, it certainly is a pretty powerful meditation, that one. I like it. I like sitting in a spinning Merkaba, and I'd really like to sit inside a spinning real one. So somebody did make a chair once, somebody made a seat at a festival that was like this, because this is one of the two shapes that can be made out of hoops instead of straight lines. This one and this one. The two, the marriage of earth and air that holds all the triangles and all the squares, and the marriage of water and ether that holds all the triangles and all the pentagons, can be made out of hoops. This one out of 3 hoops, this one out of 4. And somebody made a chair that was sitting inside a giant one of these, and I like that. Sitting inside the geometry is even better than looking at it. So there you go, folks.
Another one.
Another one.
Yeah, you say that, who is it that made these for you?
They're all made in Bali. That's another very strange story, you see, because when we first did the first ceremony, we didn't know that geometry was involved. We knew that it was earth, air, fire, water and ether, so if we'd thought about it, we would have known. But for the first year or so, we were using crystals to connect the earth circuit. We were using fire to connect the fire circuit. And we were using mirrors to connect the water circuits and the air circuits. You look into your own eyes in a mirror and that reconnects those 7 circuits. Or, if you come with a partner, you can reconnect them by looking into their eyes. So, once we realised that we actually needed geometry, then Jiva set about hacking about the world, trying to find somebody who'd make it for us. And I actually showed a piece to a blacksmith round by us, and it's obviously not quite their style. And I'm not joking, he looked like this, and he went, "No, and you'd have to be brain dead to try it," he said. But they went to America, they went to India and Pakistan and stuff like that, just places they were going anywhere to try and find somebody who had the craft to build not only these, but these amazing little things as well. And they'd practically given up, and in the end they found the people to build them on a rice paddy just on the other side of where they were living in Bali. there were some people, they were hearing all these clattering noises and knocking and kind of tinny noises coming over the field. So they thought they'd go and see what was happening. And in the end, those people turned out to be the core of what is now quite a substantial production facility. And that's another interesting point about it, is these people don't really need to be hacking around the world doing ceremonies, making themselves unpopular with the elders and stuff, because frankly they could make more than enough money just building and selling the geometry. It's amazingly popular. Yes, sir?
And what's the most remarkable effect you've seen? Or what's the standout example of this working for you? Or for someone else that you've seen happen?
Well, for me, it's very difficult to talk about other people, and as we get through the ceremonies, it's quite difficult to identify particular effects, but the early ceremony, the first ceremony, generally has a pretty profound effect on people. Quite often we've seen people looking a lot younger straight after the ceremony. It's really quite odd. But the most noticeable and most frequently reported effect, and the one that I personally experienced really massively and immediately, was a removal of fear. I was much less frightened of either taking responsibility for what I was doing or trying to ensure that if somebody was doing somebody else over, they were going to take responsibility for it. I noticed that. I also noticed that happened in people who I already regarded as totally fearless, and that was scary. Doing the ceremony with people who just are so confident anyway that they'll take on the world, you know, and then you do this with them and suddenly they're just like, calm down. And the other thing that happened, which, and this is really, I think, the most important thing about all, is that the reconnection of those elemental first 12 circuits starts encouraging you to sort out the distribution of power in personal relationships. And that's not only your personal relationships, but relationships at work and everything. And what happened to me on that was I've been going out with my present girlfriend for probably 3.5, 4 years. We were working together very well. But pretty much immediately we split up and started working as an anarcho-syndicalist commune, which we're still doing 30 years down the line. People know Rianne, stroke Jess, stroke Synchro. That's what happened to us. We decided that we just weren't going to do that anymore, and that we just wanted to focus on being an alchemical couple rather than an actual couple. And also I walked out of my final. I went. Yes, it is. It is. I also walked out of my last industrial job and never went back. So for me, it was massive. It was. I was just going, do you know what? I can't do this anymore. I just can't do this anymore. I'm going to be a gardener. Some people it doesn't seem to have any effect on at all, and we're trying to work that out. I think it's because if you're going back from this sort of exercise to a place that you hate, with people that you don't like, doing a job that you'd really rather leave, in a city that you never liked in the first place, then you just get weighed back down again with all of the stuff that you were under before you got reconnected, which is what these are called. They're called reconnection ceremonies by bit of a coincidence. But we do have exercises that I find really help. So I breathe those 12 circuits, even though I've now got, God, I lost track of how many there were. So I breathe these circuits every day, and I used to touch them as I breathe them, and I no longer have to. You can sort of feel them spinning, and that just sort of keeps you in touch with the fact. And of course, everywhere I go is just chandelier with geometry. There's geometry everywhere. Here's a good one. When we did ceremony 4 for the first time, the geometry was the flower of life, the sets of circles around each other. And for some reason they chose to test for the circuits before they'd shown us the geometry or done the workshop, which is an unusual way around for them to do it. They picked this guy and he was testing strong on some of the circuits, which just never happened before. And they go, what? So they got his magnets off him and his jewellery, and he was still testing strong. So they sat him down, and like I say, like the professionals they are, they just carry on with the workshop and think, we'll sort that out later. But that's pretty unnerving. And so they did the workshop, pulled out the geometry from a bag, really beautiful brass, flower of life, covered in holographic glitter, and the bloke she'd been trying to test said, oh, got that tattooed on my back. Lots of experiences like that as well, so yeah. Very weird, but thanks so much to Thunderbolts.info and the Electric Universe for actually making more sense of it than it bloody made in the first place. You know?
Oh.
It looks like that's it.
Thank you.
Well done. Yeah. Got away with it again.